From 1871 to 2024, there have been 235,453 games of professional baseball. That's a lot of games, and naturally, over the last 150 years, some crazy stuff has taken place on the diamond. Of course, you have many games that all go the same way. Low-scoring affairs, close contests, and other usual stuff that baseball fans have come to expect. But there's also been plenty of games that have pushed the sport to its limit. Games that are so comically outliers that they deserve to be analyzed. Wonderful little pieces of history that will never happen again. This is MLB Scorigami. Now, if for some reason you don't know what Scorigami is, I don't know why you clicked on this video. If you're here, chances are you've seen Jon Bois' video on NFL Scorigami, which is where the term originated from. And come on, this channel is basically Floridian Jon Bois at this point, so why not? But for the two of you out there who don't know, and by those two people I mean my parents, Scorigami is the art of finding unique final scores that have never happened before. Which in a sport as old as baseball means we have to go quite far out to find anything interesting. This is the Scorigami graph. The x-axis is the winner, the y-axis is the loser. The reason why part of it is blacked out is because you can't win a game 2-3. Now, you might be wondering, why choose baseball, a sport where you usually only score one run at a time? The whole reason why Scorigami is an NFL term is because in that sport, you score in increments of 6, 7, 3, 8, or 2, not 1. The only way to get Scorigami in baseball is to score a shitload of runs. And you'd be right. In fact, the overwhelming majority of games in MLB history are rather low scoring. Out of every single game ever played, only 10% ended with both teams scoring 10 or more runs. There's only been 326 games in 150 years where both teams have scored 20 or more. The vast majority of the sport takes place right here, which is where we introduce the Z-axis. Also known as how many times a final score has happened. And as you can see, it is wildly disproportionate. If you guessed 3-2 would be the most common score, you would be right, as it's happened 12,811 times. For reference, there's 2,430 games in every MLB regular season, meaning you can make up over 5 entire seasons worth of games that all end with a 3-2 final. The second most common score is 4-3 at 12,342 games, and 2-1, which for the longest time was number 1, now sits at number 3 with 11,917. These three scores make up 15.7% of games, which goes to show you just how out of balance this is. And yeah, this is a lot of games, so quick shoutouts to RetroSheet, who has the entire backlog of every single game ever played available to download on their website for free. Without them, this video would never be possible. And as you can see, the one-run contest always results in the most common games in its respective rows. Almost 10,000 5-4s, 7,000 6-5s, 3,000 8-7s, yeah, you get the picture. If you're looking for tight games that don't really have that much action, then shit, baseball is the sport for you. Even other results like 3-1, 4-2, 5-3, all super common. Games where both teams score a lot just don't happen. You know how many games in 2024 ended with both teams scoring 10 or more runs? 9. 9 games out of the whole season. Yeah, shoutouts to the Dodgers and Padres putting up a 15-11 final in Tokyo. So yeah, this sport is boring as hell, so what's even the point in doing all this? If the vast majority of games ended the same way, then there's nothing interesting to talk about, right? Well, you'd be wrong, as there's still plenty of outliers to discuss. For MLB Scorigami to happen, both teams either need to score a lot of runs, or one team just needs to absolutely pummel the other. And yes, that has happened, as the results have been some of the most fascinating baseball games I've ever seen. Because if we take away the 90% of tried and true baseball, the sport that we've all grown accustomed to, you'll find that only the crazy ass shit is all that's left. In order to find something new, the best way to do it is to beat the ever-loving crap out of your opponent, which is where the shutout row comes in. Naturally, there's been quite a lot of them, including everybody's favorite 1-0, which has happened over 5,000 times. And shit, the very first game in this data sheet on May 4th, 1871 was a 2-0 final. But as we move along, the whoopings quickly become much less frequent. There's only around 3,600 5-0s, and by the time we get to 10-0, there's only 636. At 15-0, we've dropped all the way to 72. From this point on, the destruction is truly terrifying. There's that 2017 game that saw the Twins beat the Royals 17-0, and the Cubs destroyed the Pirates 21-0 in 2022. And the worst shutout in the modern era, one that's only happened twice, a 22-0, where in 1975 the mediocre Pirates walked into Wrigley Field to play the even more mediocre Cubs in front of only 5,000 people. What resulted was an absolute massacre. Pittsburgh put up 9 runs in the first, thanks in large part to Rennie Stennett, who went 7 for 7 on the day, as the team put up 24 total hits. Poor Rick Russell only get 1 out as the Pirates sent the whole lineup to the plate, and was pulled after giving up 8 runs for Tom DeTore, who over the next few innings also gave up 8 runs. In the end, Pittsburgh won 22-0 in a game that's probably forgotten by now, and it's not even on its own anymore, as Cleveland would destroy New York with the same score almost 30 years later. But remember, this chart goes back to 1871, and believe it or not, there are worse shutouts. There's 2 23-0s and 3 24-0s, but the juicy stuff lies out here, where we see our first red squares. These 2 games produce scores that have only happened once in baseball's entire existence, and if you find a red square on this map, that means you've got something special on your hands. The 2 worst beatings in baseball, a 28-0 in 1883 between Providence and Philadelphia, and a 29-0 game in 1874, where the Boston Red Stockings demolished the Brooklyn Atlantics in a truly unholy game. How does a team lose 29-0? Well, for one, it didn't help that the Atlantics were facing one of the best pitchers of the 19th century in Albert Spalding. But the biggest culprit is that they committed 30 errors in perhaps the most embarrassing display of baseball ever put on record. Boston scored 13 in the 7th alone, as pitcher Tommy Bond was out for the entire game. Man, I can't really blame him, only 4 of the 29 runs were earned. He just had the displeasure of having the worst defense of all time behind him. Sorry, Tommy. On the other side of things, we have ties, which happen a lot more frequently than you might think. Out of everything, the 1-1 is most common with 226, but of course they still remain very rare. The majority of these came from very long ago, back before night games were commonplace. The most likely explanation for how these happened is simply it got too dark or the game was rained out. Nowadays that doesn't really happen, as if a game is delayed it can simply be suspended and picked up again at a later date. But over the last 50 or so years, there's still been a few ties here and there. The last 0-0 came in 1989, where the Cardinals and Pirates couldn't get anything going, only combining for 5 hits past the 5th. But the thunderclouds were rolling in, just as Pittsburgh was getting something going, as Doug Drabeck would reach on an error, and John Congelosi would be walked. But the rain would begin to pour, and the game would be suspended, due to old rules stating that made-up games would be replayed from the beginning instead of where they were stopped. This game remains as the final 0-0. Before we move on, I just want to mention the last true 0-0, a game that went the distance between the Mets and Phillies in 1965, where both teams displayed incredible futility at the plate. Chris Short would throw 18 strikeouts in 15 innings as the game trudged on, where the 10,000 fans, or anybody left, watched as both teams continued to suck at 1 in the morning. And due to National League rules that state a game cannot continue past 1 a.m., the game was officially called. And the hilarious part was that this was a second game of a doubleheader, and now they had to start over to make the game up just 12 hours later, where they played another doubleheader. 58 innings of baseball in 2 days between two teams that were nowhere close to postseason contention to finish the season. What the hell? And of course, that doesn't even compare to the 26-inning odyssey that ended in a 1-1 tie in 1920, but we gotta get a move on. Entering the 21st century, ties are pretty much extinct, though not completely. There's been 4 ties this side of the millennium, the last coming in 2016 between the Cubs and Pirates. How many times are these teams gonna show up in this video? With only a few days left in the season, the game was suspended due to rain, and because there wasn't enough time to make it up, and it didn't really matter for either team, the game went down in the books as the 1-1 tie. Of course, there's still some ties that had plenty of action, including the highest scoring tie in the modern era, where the Tigers, after going down 4-1 against Boston, responded with 9 runs in the 4th to go up 10-4. It didn't last, as Boston responded with 10 more to retake the lead 14-11. But in the 9th, Detroit rallied once again, with Pat Mullen hitting a bases-clearing triple to tie the game once again, sending it to extras. And after that, nothing happened, as yeah, the teams had chances. Detroit loaded the bases twice and couldn't score, and the game was called due to darkness. The funniest part, Boston would finish 1 game behind New York for the American League pennant. But the worst ties have to be these two, a 16-16 from 1894 and a 1919 from 1886 between the Philadelphia Athletics and Brooklyn Grays. But that doesn't even compare to playoff ties, which, yes, they exist, although there's only 3. A 1907 World Series game between the Tigers and Cubs was called 3-3, same with the New York Giants and Red Sox in 1912. But the most interesting came in 1922 between the Giants and Yankees. After the Yankees trounced the Giants the previous day, they found themselves down early, giving up 3 in the 1st. Trailing 3-2 in the 8th, good old Babe Ruth came up and whacked a double, and was driven in by Bob Musial, tying the game at 3. But after the 10th, the game was called due to darkness, although it was still plenty bright out. This left many fans upset and suspicious, including League Commissioner Kennesaw Landis, who asked the umpire why he called the game, to which he responded there was a haze on the field. Accusations of using the game to increase gate receipts were swept under the rug when Landis donated the money to World War I charities, marking the final postseason tie. There's been some other notable playoff games that thankfully actually had a winner, with some recent examples being Boston crushing New York 16-1 in the ALDS, and of course that 13-12 World Series game from a few years ago. While we're still talking about New York and Boston, we can't forget the 19-8 obliteration that saw the Yankees go up 3-0 in the 2004 ALCS. Surely they went on to win that series, right? Then there's complete embarrassment, like when the Braves went down 3-1 to St. Louis in the 96 NLCS, only to come out big with a 14-0 shutout in Game 5. After squeaking out a close win 2 nights later to force Game 7, the Braves shut out the Cardinals again, this time putting up 15, recording the 2 largest wins in LCS history. That also tied the aforementioned 2018 Red Sox game and a 17-2 game between Seattle and Cleveland for the second biggest playoff blowout. But the game that took the crown came in the 99 ALDS, where the Red Sox would crush the Indians 23-7 en route to completing a reverse sweep, and also marking the most runs a team has ever scored in a playoff game. And yes, the All-Star Game is included in this data, of which there have been 2 ties, a 1-1 final in 1961, and, of course, the day that ya boy came into this world in 2002, the best of both leagues came together to produce a 7-7 tie. Now, isn't that just fucking awesome? Now, with just how many games there's been over the last 150 years, Scorigami has been hard to come by. In fact, since 1970, there's only been 10 new ones, which is just the unfortunate truth of covering a sport as vast as baseball. These games represent the last strokes of a dying art, so it's fitting that we cover them and give them the recognition that they deserve. The craziest baseball games played over the last 50 years. These are the final 10 Scorigamis in Major League Baseball. Of course, we have the 22-0 shutout from 1975, but before that there's an ultra-rare case where the White Sox and Red Sox united for dual scoregami. On May 31st, 1970, the first battle of the Sox commenced as Chicago put up 11 in the first 5 innings, and Boston put up 7. But in the 6th, the game exploded with Chicago plating 7 to go up 18-7. In the 8th, they crossed the 20-run mark, and despite Boston being able to put up good offense, they didn't even come close as Chicago won 22-13. Floyd Weaver would get the win, despite giving up 9 hits and 6 runs, though Gary Jansky was the starter, as he gave up 7. Not that it mattered, when the offense recorded 24 hits on their opposition that day. But the Red Sox were not happy about this crushing defeat. And so, a few months later, on August 30th, they came into Chicago with a vengeance. Jansky would be lit up once again, as he was pulled in the 2nd after giving up 8 runs. After the 3rd, Boston sat ahead at 13-3, but the White Sox wouldn't surrender that easily, as they scored 7 of their own to make it 13-10. The game remained surprisingly close heading to the 9th, with Boston up 15-11, but with 2 outs, they had their own offensive explosion, as the Red Sox would score 6 more to rub it in even more, resulting in a 21-11 final. 2 scoregamis in the same season by the same 2 teams. Now isn't that just poetic? The 1970s had surprisingly lots of action in the scoregami department, with 2 more to close the decade, and oddly enough, it was between the same 2 teams. The Cubs, seeing their South Side cousins putting up incredible numbers, wanted to get in on the action, and on April 17, 1976, they hosted the Phillies in a wild affair that saw Chicago get up 13-2 early on, only to blow it in spectacular fashion. 4 homers, lots of hits, and bullpen ineptitude allowed Philly to slowly crawl their way back into the game, with Steve Swisher hitting a double in the 9th to unbelievably tie it at 15 and send it to extra innings, where they kept pushing, as another homer and a sac fly had them up 18-15 in the 10th. Now, that score had already happened, but luckily, Bill Madlock would hit a double to center in the bottom of the 10th to score Mike Adams to punch their ticket to immortality. They might not have won, but they did create the first, and so far only, 18-16 final score. And yet, 3 years later, on May 17th, 1979, they were right back at it, and it kicked off immediately with 13 combined runs in the first inning. But this time, the fate seemed to be flipped, as Philly got out big with 8 in the 3rd, and the Cubs responded with 7 in the 5th. After 5 innings, it was 21-16. Amazingly, only 11 pitchers were used between both teams, with 6 of them giving up 5 or more runs. 6 Cubs had 3 or more hits, with Bill Buckner driving in 7 runs, including a grand slam in the 5th. On the other side, Philly had 5 men record 3 or more hits, with Larry Boa stepping up to the plate 8 times and producing 5 hits, making for 10% of the total hits on the day. Yeah, there were 50 hits between both teams, by the way. With the Cubs down by 5, they pushed back in the 6th to get within 2, but Philly would get one back to go up 22-19. In the 8th, Buckner would drive in another run, and 2 more singles from Jerry Martin and Barry Foote would tie the game at 22, where it headed to extras. What the hell? But at the end of the day, it was Mike Schmidt who called game, with a towering shot to left field to give Philadelphia the lead, where Raleigh Eastwick would retire the side to end the second highest scoring game between teams in the modern era. 23-22. If you're wondering, the number 1 highest scoring game came in 1922 between guess who? The fucking Cubs and Phillies, where this time Chicago got the edge, winning 26-23. For our next case, we go to Atlanta, where the Giants destroyed the Braves 23-8 on June 8, 1990, which saw Rick Parker and Will Clark record 6 RBIs each. In similar fashion, the Red Sox crushed the Royals 20-11 just a few years later. The 24 column, which is pretty barren, got 2 new additions just a few years apart. In April 96, the Twins would defeat the Tigers 24-11. And in 99, the Reds smacked 28 hits on the poor Rockies, posting a final of 24-12. That game would be the last scoregami for 20 years until September 9th, 2020, where the Braves would torch the Marlins in front of, nobody. Yeah, it was the COVID season after all. 'Tis a shame too, as nobody got to witness the legacy game of Adam Duvall, who hit 3 homers for 9 RBIs on the day. In the top of the second, Jorge Alfaro would hit a single to score Garrett Cooper, and Jazz Chisholm would knock a triple to center, giving Miami a 2-0 lead. Now, because this is the Miami Marlins, they seem to have committed a sin against God, and thus were subjected to divine wrath, in the form of the Braves putting up 11 runs in the bottom half, as 14 batters came to the plate, and it took 3 different pitchers to get out of it. But the torture was only just beginning, as the Marlins would foolishly try to retaliate, as Lewis Brinson would hit a 3-run bomb in the third, and they would tack on a few more to make it 13-8 in the fourth. Clearly, they didn't have enough punishment yet, as a bases-clearing double from Freddie Freeman and 2 more homers made it 22-8 in just the 5th inning. Man, poor Jordan Yamamoto. He was left to die out there, as he gave up 13 runs in 3 innings. This game was so bad that it basically killed his career, as in 2021 he would put up mediocre stats on the Mets, and he was released soon after. Man, I hope he's doing well, wherever he is. And yeah, the Braves still wouldn't let up, as Acuna would drive in 3 more in the 6th, and after Miami let out one last gasp of air in the form of an RBI from Alfaro, Duvall would hit the nail in the coffin with a slam in the 7th. 29-9. If that doesn't destroy a team, then I don't know what will. And yeah, of course this happens to the Marlins of all teams. Man, is this team fucking cursed or what? And that's the most recent scoregami. Yeah, there's been some close calls, with games producing final scores for only the 2nd or 3rd time. There's the Padres beating the Nats 24-8 just a few years ago, the Angels crushing Colorado 25-1, and Toronto stomping Boston 28-5 just to name a few. And to throw my Rays in there, in 2004 they pummeled the Jays in 1913, marking only the 2nd time that score's happened, so that's nice. The most notable of these has to be the Rangers' 30-3 beatdown on the Orioles. Yeah, believe it or not, that score has happened before, in 1891 from the Washington Senators defeating the original Brewers. Kinda fitting, since the Senators would move to Texas in 1960 to become the Rangers. In fact, they're the only team in the modern era to score 30 runs in a game, as we enter the far reaches of outer space. Out here, baseball begins to lose its meaning. Only 22 games have resulted in a team scoring 30 or more runs, with all but one happening in the 19th century. In fact, the last team to do so before the Rangers was the Chicago Colts, as they defeated the Louisville Colonels 36-7. These are some truly devastating losses, and yeah, the news headlines would agree. Slaughter of innocents! Like, goddamn man, this is a baseball game we're talking about. This includes the biggest ass-whooping of them all, where the New York Mutuals would wipe the Chicago White Stockings off the face of the planet 38-1, marking the biggest blowout in baseball history. 34 hits, 21 errors from Chicago. Good God, man, this box score is like reading an autopsy. There's been some super high-scoring games where both teams were competitive, including the Athletics beating Washington 30-19, a 34-19 game in 1872, 37-16 in 1871, and somehow a 39-14 game between Baltimore and Brooklyn in 1872. These are games where players just went up there and walloped the ball all damn day, and they probably had the same guy pitching the whole time. Shit, man, if I gave up 39 runs in one game, I don't think I would ever play baseball again. My name would be permanently ruined. It was just a different time then, and nowadays, these kinds of games will never happen. Only one team has scored 30 runs in over 100 years, and with how good pitching has become, the days of teams giving up 30 plus are long, long gone. And that's what makes these games so special, I suppose, as they will forever remain untouched until the end of time. And that's the end. Or maybe not. Because if you've noticed, I've kinda glossed over something. If the highest scoring game was only 39, then why does the graph go past that? Well, there is one more game that needs to be mentioned. The craziest baseball game that has ever been seen. All alone in its own universe lies an entirely different sport. This term was made for the NFL after all, and this final score definitely looks like a football score. On December 19th, 1971, the Houston Oilers came back from down 23-7 and posted 42 points in the second half to defeat the Chargers 49-33, marking the only time that score has happened in the NFL. 100 years before, on June 28, 1871, the Philadelphia Athletics and Troy Haymakers took the field in the most insanely beautiful baseball game ever played. It was 9-6 after the third. Then Troy would post 10 in the fourth to tie the game at 16 after Philadelphia had put up 7. They would score 9 more in the fifth and 8 in the sixth to get up to 33-24 after only 6 innings. In the eighth, the Philadelphia Athletics became the only team to surpass 40 runs, and they almost made it to 50 as they put up 8 in the ninth. But they had to settle for 49, and their opponent, who was also consistently scoring, couldn't match the red-hot pace of the Athletics and finished with only 33. 74 combined hits, 20 errors, 24 extra base hits, with only 3 home runs and 15 stolen bases between both teams. Philadelphia got 53 men on base and scored all but 4 of them. God damn! John Radcliffe, the number 3 hitter, went 7 for 7 with 2 walks. And do you want to know the worst part? Both pitchers were out there the whole game, with the Troy pitcher, John McMullen, not being able to strike out a single batter. Man! Dick McBride of Philly didn't do much better, as he only got 2 strikeouts on the day. But shit, I don't think it even mattered who was on the mound that day, as both these teams were just on course for history, no matter what. Four hours of greatness at Haymakers grounds resulted in a 49-33 final score. 150 years later, the field is long gone, and now the land is home to a simple neighborhood. I wonder if anybody living there knows. Not too far, there's some Little League ballparks. You know, you can go there and take some swings, catch some fly balls, and aim for the fences, and know that you are standing right next to the site of the greatest scoregami in baseball history.